Hey everyone, welcome to the Coach Catalyst podcast. This show is about helping you grow as a coach by standing on the shoulders of giants. Each show, you get a different mentor in your ear. The early motivations, the successes, the failures, the tools, the tricks, and the insight into where the industry is going. All of it so you can make your own dent in the world. Remember, success leaves clues. Now, without further ado, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Coach Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Whitwer. I'm really excited about my guest today. He was actually my first business coach as I was getting my feet wet in the industry probably over a decade ago. I owe much of my business education and success to his guidance. Today's guest is who I affectionately call the fitness OG, Pat Rigsby. Pat has built over a dozen businesses as a CEO and co-owner, with 5 becoming million-dollar or multi-million-dollar ventures. He's a best-selling author 6 times over and has been featured in Entrepreneur Magazine, Men's Health, USA Today, and on hundreds of other media outlets. Pat has been in the coaching industry for over 30 years, with the last 20 heavily involved in the fitness industry. I've yet to meet someone who has the diverse experience that Pat has. From a World Series collegiate baseball coach to sports performance facility, to Gold's Gym, to fitness franchise owner, to fitness franchise founder, to business coach, which is what he does today, Pat has literally done and seen it all. In this episode, we pack all of it, and we go down nostalgia lane. We talk about what hasn't changed in the industry and likely what won't change in the near future. We talk through lessons learned, mistakes made, and what he might have done differently in his journey. We talk about where the industry is going and how a coach can prepare themselves for the future. I love talking to people that have been in an industry for decades because you aren't successful at something for 20 years if you didn't figure out a thing or two along the way. Success definitely leaves clues, and innovation happens when we stand on the shoulder of giants instead of repeating their mistakes. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Pat Rigsby, welcome to the Coach Catalyst podcast.
Well, I'm glad to be here and excited to get to chat with you for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real treat for me. For those of you listening, I've been in the industry for probably 10 or 12 years. And my first business coach inside the fitness industry was Pat Rigsby. And so it's kind of fun 12 years later to be able to come back and have that conversation. Pat, you've been in the industry for a long time, probably 20 years. We talked about this before, 30 years since when you first started getting interested in coaching. The question I like to ask people that have been in the industry for this long is, what hasn't changed from 20 years ago? What's the same about the industry 20 years ago, despite all of the trends and things that have went on? What do you feel like is still there?
I think the thing that has maybe remained the most constant from my perspective is that the mission is still the same: to help somebody go from where they are to where they want to be. My first kind of leg of coaching was more on the sports performance side with athletes and everything, but it's still, um, the person that you work with has their own vision of what they want their life to look like, whether it's aesthetics or health or performance. And your job as a coach is to help them bridge the gap from where they are to where they want to be. And you got to kind of use every tool that you have access to in your toolbox.
So, I mean, coaching has never changed. Kind of, I guess maybe the tools have changed and evolved, but the fact of coaching kind of remains the same. Are there other areas that you've seen in the fitness industry that kind of transcend trends?
Yeah. So I think that there there are a few things. I actually have done a talk on the Perform Better kind of tour thing where I talk about things that won't change. And people are always going to need coaching. Accountability is always going to be paramount because we're asking somebody to adopt new behaviors, change the way that they operate, and change is hard. So accountability is always going to be important and always has been. People want to feel important and valued. That's going to be a constant. So making that person kind of the recipient of the spotlight is always going to be key, I think. Um, I think that some of the fundamental things about the how don't necessarily change. It always kind of seems that the fundamentals went out and the fads kind of fall by the wayside. Um, and I think that things like connecting with people, following up with people, from the business or marketing side of it, the tactical approach to how we may do it changes. But I mean, this was the same when I got into this, as a college baseball coach, recruiting, sending people letters through the mail and that sort of stuff versus texting and email and whatever else now. So I think a lot of stuff has actually remained the same. I think that the tools that we use, the technology we use to execute it, and maybe the circumstances that people operate in, the role smartphones play in people's lives, the role that technology as a whole play in their lives. That all evolves, but a lot of the basics pretty much hold true.
Hmm. So you kind of mentioned it a little bit there. Kind of your first foray. You said in college you were kind of starting to get into fitness, into health. Was that did you kind of have a sport background and that's what led into it, or was there another kind of impetus that kind of pushed you into this kind of health industry?
Well, I was a an athlete. I say that knowing you were a way better athlete. So when I say I was an athlete, probably tongue in cheek, right? But I was an athlete growing up. Played baseball through all the way through a little bit of independent professional baseball, and I was somebody that maybe wasn't the most physically gifted person. I'm not particularly tall. I didn't, I was kind of smaller, and so gravitated to strength and conditioning to try to maybe bridge some of that gap for myself. Really just started to enjoy learning about it. Got my first certification really for my own personal gain when I was 20. Um, Worked in the athletic department at a university. Um, Even finishing up my degree, became a head baseball coach, head strength conditioning coach at the ripe old age of 23, and worked in that kind of segment of the industry, if you will, for about 7 more years after that before I moved into the private sector. So yeah, it's been a long road. I just turned 50 this year, so that means I've got about 30 years under my belt of this in a professional sense, if you will.
So with the baseball coaching, did you get hired from the same university that you graduated from?
I did. I did. I finished up as a student assistant. Did Was an assistant coach. That kind of last year, and I think largely because of my familiarity and maybe the fact that it wasn't a very good job when I got it. It probably put me in a position where I could go be a viable candidate. So yeah, it was definitely not in great demand at the time, and so for me, it was an opportunity at 23,
Right.
and my first couple of years, I was the youngest head coach in the country, and it was just one of those things where it's like, well, I'm kind of terrified to do it, but I'm terrified that if I don't, I'll regret it for a long, long time.
Hmm. And I mean, you had a lot of success with that program and kind of turning it around. What would you say some of your kind of key principles around that turnaround were?
You know, it's funny you ask, and I know that I'm sure I've told all these stories to you before in non-recorded settings, but
Right.
so much of the stuff that's helped me as a business coach, and as a business owner were the same things that helped me there. Being somebody who would be willing to approach things maybe differently than the competition because maybe I didn't have the same resources. So we did place a real emphasis on things like strength and conditioning when maybe it was more of an afterthought in the college baseball landscape at the time. Being very at that point player centric, now client centric, and focusing on, okay, how do we create an environment that you want to be in, that you're going to thrive in, instead of, a lot of, in that era, a lot of it was like, hey, come adapt to us, not we're going to meet you where you are. And so there was a lot of emphasis there. I think I had an advantage being relatively young. I wasn't very far removed with the mindset of the people that I was coaching, so I could think about what was important to them, what their goals were, and now I think people who might be a little bit older sometimes think, well, this is what should be important to you, or this is what your goals should be,
Mm-hmm.
and at that point, I was pretty much in line with the reality of who they were and what they wanted. I think I dove pretty heavily into the marketing side of things and saw recruiting as marketing. So I learned copywriting early on, and our recruiting letters looked way different than our competition's recruiting letters. I was very proactive with my marketing approach in many ways, like getting referrals from current players. Uh, I didn't have a family at that point, so I was more than happy to be in the office at 11 o'clock at night calling recruits that were in a time zone 3 hours behind us. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of those things that helped me then, just approaching the challenge at hand and figuring out the best way to solve it rather than just saying, well, this is what everybody else does, helped me a bunch because our resources weren't nearly as good as our competition. The market that we were in, the town, was not a thriving community that had a big population, so I had to be a little more creative in
Mm-hmm.
getting people. um the My experience obviously was pretty limited compared to the people that we played against. So um and I think that resourcefulness and willingness to look at different ways to solve the problem is really, that was kind of the springboard for everything that I've done ever since. And I look back and I kind of laugh at it now because I probably didn't know what I didn't know, but I know all that stuff's helped me a bunch for the last 30 years or 25 years or whatever else it'd be.
Right. Was marketing something that you kind of were always into, or did you see it as, I need to find a way to get people here, and so then you kind of dove into the marketing world to see if you could pull out some ideas to get players to come play?
The latter for sure. I was not a business major. In the beginning, I tried to read a few textbooks and, tried to learn marketing, and a lot of it just seemed like a foreign language to me. And I found a book that helped connect the dots for me and kind of dove in a different way. And it became something where I thought, well, hey, there's a bit of a blue ocean here. This is something I can be good at that the people that I compete against aren't prioritizing. And so, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was a baseball guy who liked baseball. So
Right.
that was kind of a means to an end that, has actually ended up playing a really prominent role in my life ever since.
Do you remember what the book was?
Oh, yeah. The Wizard of Ads by Roy Williams.
Okay.
Um,
And was that,
if
I mean,
a
did you
book
did you
can
seek the
change somebody's life, that was it.
okay. Is that book still in print? Do you know?
uh, I know it's still available on Amazon because I've bought dozens and dozens of copies for people. along the
Right.
way. So I'm not 100% sure if at this point it's like, hey, I'm just getting used copies or secondhand copies or whatever else. But
Right.
yeah, and I'm sure I know I have at least two on my shelf here, and I have a few downstairs that I've probably just stored up to hand out whenever
Right.
people pop by my house.
I like it. So how many years were you doing the coaching thing?
Um, all told, counting the assistant time, 8 years.
And then did you just get to a point where it's like, I need a new challenge, I want to try something different? Or was there a turning point that ended up kind of moving you out of the baseball coaching?
Man, it would have been nice if it sounded that like if it was as smooth as you presented it. I basically had a lot of friction with our vice president, and and I had applied for a few jobs. I'd been offered a few jobs that maybe weren't the ones that I wanted, and the ones that I wanted I didn't get. Um,
Mhm.
but I had some friction with the vice president who oversaw our segment of the university, and it just came to a head. And I don't even know if you could call it a power struggle because I was very much low man on the totem pole, so didn't have much power, and was forced to resign because we certainly didn't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. And I would say that at that point, a lot of me not seeing eye to eye were a lot of my entrepreneurial tendencies, like things that I felt like, I want to have control over things. For example, the way the budgets were laid out, we finished fifth at the World Series one year. The men's soccer team didn't win a conference game, had never won a conference game in my entire time there. Yet we had the same budget and carried like three times as many players as they did. So
Mhm.
things like that, they just didn't equate for me, right? And I understand, like, probably looking back, that I needed to embrace the fact that there are different ways of looking at that. But for me, that was like, hey, you earn what you get. We did a good job. We should be rewarded. And so I think that was really the impetus for me to think, I need to be in an environment where I can go have a little more control over my own destiny here rather than just play with whatever budget's handed down and let other people in a very bureaucratic environment, because not only was it a university, but it was a state funded university. So like layers of bureaucracy. Um, instead of having to kind of play in that setting. So I think I didn't necessarily know that I wasn't going to be a college baseball coach long term. It was kind of one of those things where, hey, this is all I know to this point, but I wasn't confident that I could
Mhm.
find an environment in that world that allowed me the autonomy that I think I saw it.
And was Holly in the picture at this point?
Nope, she came into the picture probably 2 years after that, I think. Roughly 2 years,
Okay.
2.5, something like that. So I was single and kind of untethered as far as I could go move and explore some other options. And that turned out, being real favorable for me because I could go put myself in situations where I could maybe learn in somebody else's environment before I went out and, messed a lot of things up trying to start a business without ever being part of a business.
Right. So, I mean, what was that first move? You decide that you're moving on from baseball. What was that first move?
So I had a couple job offers almost immediately, some staying in the baseball coaching world, but then one really kind of stood out. And it was the opportunity to run a baseball performance facility, that had lessons and batting cages and ran camps and stuff. And, for me, that seemed like this just spot on opportunity with what I wanted. It was like, okay, I can be in a world that I understand. I already have some contacts in that part of the region because I had recruited there. Um, but I can do, I can learn business. I can be exposed to some stuff I've not been exposed to in the university world. And it's almost like getting a different degree, um, but doing it in a way that was a little bit safer for me rather than jumping completely out of the sports and fitness world. So I went and did that for um, about 6 months and loved it, and it was great. And they sold the building, and so I had to kind of move from there. But I'm glad it all transpired the way it did. But it was a really great learning environment because I got to learn marketing. I got to learn the operational side. I got to navigate the budget. I mean, they were really almost kind of like hands off, the ownership group, and just kind of played an advisory role. So I got to do a lot of the things that an owner gets to do without a lot of the risk or financial investment out of the gate.
What would you say was one of your big takeaways from that experience? Was there any like moments that really helped kind of change trajectory or impact thinking?
So there were a couple things that really stand out. The first was the the previous summer they had lost about $70,000. Like they had been about $70,000 in the red because they had a pretty steep overhead. It was a big building, and the kids who played baseball were out playing baseball during the summer. And and they made up for it and were very profitable during the winter, and kind of got to a point where it broke even annually in the past. But
Mhm.
the summer that I took over, we broke even for the summer. So like a $70,000 improvement. And that gave me a great deal of confidence that maybe it wasn't as far fetched as it might have been, that, hey, I could actually go do this. And I didn't need to go run and apply for a bunch of small college baseball jobs or anything like that. That, hey, this idea has some legs, and I can pursue it. So that was probably the most important part. But then the second was an idea that, I to the best of my knowledge, I coined the phrase front end offer in our industry. And I did this thing where I would go around and take all these little league teams, and I would make this really kind of irresistible offer to do this hitting lesson for the team for a very small fee. And I had bunches of teams come through this. I mean, it was like multiple teams a night for like 2 months. And every one of those teams would yield two or three or four kids who would continue on and do lessons, and maybe another couple that would sign up for our ongoing camps and that sort of stuff. And so that was kind of like my first front end offer, where it was like, hey, if I can get somebody in and make a good first impression and deliver something valuable, there are going to be opportunities to move them into long-term programs. And I mean, fast forward almost, heck, we're almost 20 years later, or roughly 20 years later, and I still use that same methodology. And frankly, that's probably one of the more prominent business strategies in our industry today. Uh, and that was where it started for me. So those two things really stand out.
So after that kind of 6 months there, the facility's moving. You kind of knew that you could do your own thing. Was that when you started to really try and figure out what's next for me, and do I want to go start something on my own?
I think if I would have had a little more runway to do it, I would have either bought, taken over that business and done something there,
Hmm.
or started something in that realm. But because the sale of the building happened kind of in an abrupt fashion, um, I said, I need to go take a job while I'm still figuring this out. And I ended up taking a job managing a personal training department for what was then the largest franchisee of Gold's Gyms in the United States in one location. And within, like, I don't know, maybe 8 weeks, I was running all the training and all the gyms that franchisee had in the state of Kentucky. Um, so that was kind of the next step. And it was really my first kind of spin in the whole commercial fitness industry that, instead of more sports based stuff.
And then, I mean, that's a really unique opportunity. I mean, because I mean, that's way different than sports performance. You're looking at a massive kind of global gym. Um, and so, what were some of the big takeaways from that experience?
Um, I think the first one was getting a comfort with asking people for money and just selling in that environment, and selling something that maybe I didn't personally always have a high perceived value for, because I had never hired a trainer. I had always come from a pretty blue collar background where people didn't hire personal trainers. And so being in that environment, to helping me to understand the clientele, helping me to get comfortable with selling in that setting, helping me to get really comfortable with you know being okay with somebody saying no and having to bounce back and talk to somebody new soon thereafter. I think that helped a great deal. I think that getting an understanding of the health club environment, both the good and the bad. There were certain things that I liked. There were definitely a lot of things that I didn't like, especially at that stage of the health club industry where there were a lot of contracts riddled with fine print that people couldn't get out of without doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And it just, to be honest, it seemed a little bit seedy as an industry sometimes, where it just seemed like they would sell you one thing and deliver something else entirely. And so understanding that and saying, okay, well, how can I still work in this kind of landscape, but do things with some integrity and do things in a way that makes sense, but can still be profitable. And so that was a kind
Hmm.
of a cool laboratory to figure that out, because I was trying to figure out that, okay, do you have to do this to be profitable? Do you have to almost seemingly double bill somebody at least once a year and try to sneak it by them to make this work? Do you have to have somebody send a cancellation form certified mail to keep them there long enough to be profitable? It's like, and I recognize that no, you don't, but they weren't really service minded people. They were just renting access to stuff. And
Right.
so, it was a neat learning experience, both good and bad.
So, from a selling perspective, did you find that you really had to do a lot of work in that? And if so, were there any resources that you kind of leaned on to help improve your ability to really communicate?
I had always read a lot of stuff uh on influence, on communication, the how to win friends and influence people and that type of stuff. Because recruiting, and the recruiting side
Hmm.
of uh college athletics is kind of the lifeblood. And I think once I came to a level of comfort that, man, recruiting a kid to a university where you're not giving them like a full scholarship or something, but you've got to make mom and dad feel comfortable that you're going to be, a trustworthy mentor and resource for their child, and this is going to be the right environment for them. Once I could kind of connect those dots and, um, you know, accepted that, man, that's a way tougher sell than somebody buying 2 times a week of training. Um, that helped a great deal. And then I think also I just, for whatever reason, I had kind of an aha moment after talking to somebody who was pretty professionally successful that was a client, just how they thought about money and kind of what the investment for training was for them relative to their income. It was an aha moment. It was like, well, hey, if I'm making $35,000 a year, 4 grand annually may be a big deal to me because it's over 10% of my income. If for the person making $300,000 a year, it's a little over 1% of their
Mhm.
income, not as big a deal. And so just a few things that, I kind of had to just get out of my own way and understand who I was serving and that they were the star of the show. And if I was going to be able to do something for them or help them, guide them to do something that they weren't having a lot of success doing on their own, then, it was potentially a pretty valuable thing for them. And, it helped me really embrace this concept of value exchange.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so true, myself included, but lots of coaches in the industry, right? When you get started, you're not coming into the industry making boatloads of money. You're coming in at the bottom, and so you bring those same perspectives into that meeting with a potential client who's maybe 50 years old and the CEO of a company, or maybe they're, a high level lawyer or doctor, and we just don't have like we don't really understand that, and so we kind of bring our own um, insecurities maybe into that meeting. And so I think you're spot on as far as really realizing from the other person's perspective that 300 bucks a month to them is not a big deal at all, and
Yeah.
the value that you're giving them, whether it's their health and just basically the mental space where they don't have to think about it, may be worth more than that to them. So
Yeah. Sure.
all right, so you were there for how long with Golds?
Um, Maybe a year and a half. Yeah, not quite a year and a half, but close to it, in that range. And then had the opportunity to start a business in a small town, not super small. I mean, I've been to the town where your gym was, and so not quite that small, and a bit like 24,000 people, and
Yeah.
they were kind of adopting this training business approach that had become pretty prominent in some of the bigger markets, where the big box health club was going to outsource the services and outsource the retail and just be a membership thing and then collect rent. And so I had this opportunity to go and, with a business partner, um, take over those in a health club that was going into this other market. So it was a really kind of cool opportunity to get my feet wet as a business owner without having a lot of risk when it came to investing in real estate, investing in equipment. It was largely a service business that honestly got started for like $2,500. So it was, I mean, it was a change. I was moving to a town literally I had never stepped foot in. and
Mm-hmm.
um, didn't know anybody, so I couldn't lean on a lot of relationships and connections to kind of get started. But it, it was a great opportunity to get my feet wet and be really focused. You referenced Holly earlier. I had just started dating Holly. Um, so, I wasn't so settled in with a lot of things like, a house and multiple kids
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. So, I could kind of pour myself into to getting this thing off the ground.
And how did you come across it initially? Was it a connection through someone? I mean, was it just random happenstance? Like, how did you come across this opportunity?
So the people that were opening the gym actually lived in the town in the city, Lexington, Kentucky, where I was, um, where I was working at the time. I had met him. The guy that I was became business partners with had a relationship with him. I knew him through some of the work that I was doing there, and we just kind of said, "Hey, you do he you handle the retail side, I'll handle the service side, and
Mm-hmm.
sure, let's go pursue this."
And so, I mean, really, now you're getting into training. I mean, it's really creating a training business within of a bigger business, right? And at that time,
Which
was it? Were you doing one on ones? Were you doing groups?
it was one on one, but going into a market that um really there hadn't been a lot of personal training in the market. It was small town, not a lot of gyms.
Mm-hmm.
Uh the household income was about average household income was about $38,000 a year. So was like, well, how can we make the math work? So,
Mm-hmm.
started selling 30-minute one-on-one sessions where people would have a prescribed warm up and conditioning work prescribed after, and then the 30-minute session would be the supervised,
Mm-hmm.
strength part of what they were doing. Sold that so we could actually generate the amount of hourly money that we needed to make, right? Like the hourly rate, but do it in a way that was more palatable for that market's budget. Um, and then about a year later, started to dive into like group nutrition coaching, and then started to introduce a little bit more semi-private and a little bit of group stuff. But really, that first year was exclusively one-on-one training, and the bulk of the time in that location was at any given point the actual training side, not nutrition, was always at least 90% one-on-one, and it grew. It got to the point where we I think hit about 420 clients at the 18-month mark. So that's a pretty good penetration rate for a city. Like a lot of clubs were talking
Mm-hmm.
about, hey, let's get a 2 or 3% penetration rate of our gym membership to hire trainers. And heck, we were um, not too far off a 2% penetration rate for everybody in the city limits.
Right. And were you doing a lot? I mean, were you training a ton at this time, or did you have kind of a team of people that were working with you?
So I certainly trained, but I hired people before we ever opened. I knew that if I was going to
Okay.
move to this place, I wasn't going to paint myself into a corner. And having already, spent time as a college baseball coach and having assistant coaches and that stuff, I was very comfortable with leadership and systems. And I mean, as a baseball coach, I had a pretty extensive playbook, and that was more about, okay, getting everybody on the same page and having uniform vernacular and everything. So yeah, we had a staff of like four coaches on the day of opening. And um so I trained some in the beginning. I did the the lion's share of the selling, probably 90% of it, but over time, spent a lot of time on sales training and got to the point where every coach was selling a little, and
Hmm.
they could sell more based on their desire or tolerance.
So was that, I mean, was that scary at all? You're going into a brand new business venture. You already have people on payroll. You don't have anyone yet, purchasing or buying or participating. Or did you have enough belief in yourself that, hey, we're gonna figure it out?
Blind faith, right? So I'll be honest, like, uh, I did not have a great deal of fear because I think the saving grace in all this is my entire identity back when I was a college baseball coach was tied up in that. I mean, man, I had a radio show, I was on billboards, I was uh like I thought that was my goal. I want to be a Hall of Fame college baseball coach. I'm going to do this. And so when and basically I was told like, "Hey, you're going to resign."
Hmm.
I'm like, "Man, I don't know anybody in this other town. I'm anonymous here. I'm going to go in here and do everything I can, but I mean, it's the worst that can happen is not going to be 2% is uncomfortable for me is what I just experienced a few years ago."
So the bar had, you really is like you'd hit, I don't want to call it rock bottom, but like you'd hit a point where it's like it can't be that bad. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, it was like, man, I felt very unencumbered. I felt like, hey, I can
Yeah.
go do this, and I'm trying to build something really successful. And if it doesn't work, oh well. You know what? I've been through stuff
Hmm.
before, and I'm here and happy and healthy and trying something new and exciting. And I kind of always knew also that I had the opportunity to get back into baseball. I had actually like almost the exact same time we opened, got a better job offer than I had ever had during the time that I was actively coaching college baseball. I had a Power Five assistant coach offering. And so I was like, I mean, if it doesn't work out, I can go do that. And
Hmm.
whether or not that was true, it's kind of how I made myself comfortable to just go and show up at work and do my job every day. And I was really excited about it. I mean, you've built multiple businesses, man. There's that honeymoon phase early on where you're just you
Yep.
can't wait and you just want to go do stuff. And so, like, every day it was like, okay, it was almost like this competition to go, hey, how many new clients can we get today? What can we do here? How can we build? And uh, the scary side of it, whether it was me being naive or something else, it just never really entered into it because I was so consumed with building something that for whatever reason I believed that was clearly going to happen.
Hmm. I think that's so common with new businesses. You're so heads down in it that you don't even realize what's going on around you because you just have a belief that hard work and you're going to figure it out and you'll get there eventually. So, was there like a marketing strategy, or was there any strategies you guys used right away that helped kind of fill the sales room?
And it was free samples. I mean, there's not a lot of brand new things in my playbook that that have come up. Like, I'm a
Mhm.
big believer that if you've got something really valuable, get somebody to experience it. And so we did
Mhm.
a lot of free sessions, multiple free session opportunities. If there was working the floor stuff, it was free. If there was time that people weren't working, it was going out and networking in the local community and inviting people in to experience something free. And then there was a very systematic process that, okay, somebody comes in, they have this experience, and then this is how we transition that to a sales opportunity. So it was largely how can I get as many people to experience this as possible from a, just a very multifaceted approach. I did utilize publicity a little bit. I had done a lot of marketing of our baseball program, like being the guy that if I didn't get a story run in the paper by submitting a press release, I would walk the press release into the sports room at the newspaper. And so, I anytime we did something interesting, positive, whatever, I would send press releases, got to know some of those guys, and we got a few things run, including pretty substantial front page story and that sort of stuff. Not only got some immediate traction where some people came in, but it also just created a little more awareness. So there was some credibility there. There was that opportunity to create some repetition because people saw that, and then when they saw us later, they're like, "Oh, you were in the paper." So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so those two things I think were um pretty paramount. And then after we gained some traction, the referral stuff definitely became more important.
And at this time, were you selling sessions or were you doing the like monthly membership?
Man, I've never sold sessions. We from day one sold 12-month training memberships on like a subscription billing. And I mean, and this was
Mm-hmm.
2004. So I remember going to a couple of the people who were the two most prominent consultants in the industry at the time, names that most people would know. And both of them told me that there was no way that you could sell 12-month training memberships and that I was crazy. Uh, like I said, I was crazy. They laced in a little bit of profanity in telling me I was crazy. They were so convinced. And I'm like, well, what do you mean I can't do that? I already have 200 clients on it. But yeah, we sold that from day one. And again, that was probably one of those things where being naive was pretty good because I didn't
Right.
come in with this preconceived belief that this is how it has to be. I'm like, well, if the gym can sell a membership and these people are here, why wouldn't they want this if they're already committed to be here? And that was kind of my rationale. Um and so the entire time we were there, the training stuff, again, not the nutrition, at no point in time was it ever below 90% of the clientele was on a 12-month membership. Every now and again, there'd be a 3-month or, 6-month or whatever, but always at least 90% were 12-month subscriptions for training.
So kind of staying on that note, do you think there's anything in the industry right now that has just been done for so long that no one's really questioning it? Or maybe you're seeing with your coaching clients, they're doing it a little bit differently and having a little bit of success. Is there anything out there right now that kind of has this similar feel of sessions to memberships?
Um, Probably not quite as extreme, uh, but I think the large group stuff is one of those things where I mean, when I was in a health club environment that have plenty of classes, right?
Hmm.
And they were instructor driven classes, and it would be, hey, come in and do this class, and you have a menu of dozens of options throughout the course of the week, depending on the size of the club, and you get all of these included for your $39 a month membership. And now you get like the same number of classes at like Orange Theory for like 4 times that much. And
Hmm.
so I think the idea that people um like logically don't don't understand that, well, at some point that's going to eventually be kind of a commodity if you're not personalizing this for somebody, if they're just a face in the crowd. at some point that probably goes the way of the big box expensive membership, and somebody comes in like Planet Fitness did health clubs and disrupts it. So I think that's
Hmm.
where a lot of savvy people have figured out the small group training stuff and everything, just where you can build more connections and you can personalize things. And so I think there's a little bit of it there. It's not quite to that extreme by any means. I think that the mentality of a lot of the fitness professionals that, hey, somebody needs to come in and be committed from day one is something again that probably is kind of silly if you think about it from a logical perspective, right? Like, number one, if they were already committed, they probably aren't shopping for what you're selling now because they're already involved somewhere else, right? But then two, somebody being interested in being committed, we would still think, well, they should sample something and experience it before they make a commitment, because being interested in being committed and being committed to me or to you is something completely different. Like, you need to find the fit if you're going to be willing to commit to it. So I think those two things I think are definitely poised to change. I still am a little bit surprised, and this is definitely improved by how heavy the marketing is to aesthetics and young people. Um, I think that we've definitely trended in the right direction that way, but I mean, that's like the tip of the iceberg is to the potential benefits that coaches and effective health fitness businesses can provide. And it's like we've narrowed this down to the stuff that goes on the stock postcards that clubs send out at grand openings. Man, we can be so much more than that, and a lot of us already are. So
Right.
but those are the things that I think have the potential to change pretty significantly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on, especially with that last one. Um, and really, how we're thinking about our businesses is there's this huge demographic of 50-plus-year-olds that have a fair amount of expendable income, and their kids just went off to college, and now they've got some free time, or they just retired, and they've been active their whole life, and they see people in their lives starting to slow down, and they want to be active. And we found that those clients are the ones that they're loyal, they stay forever, and they bring their friends. And so I would chase them all day versus trying to go after a 22-year-old and trying to get them to come in and have them flake out in a couple months. So, all right. So you were doing you're doing the training thing. Was the goal then, because you're very growth minded? It's kind of like, what's next? Were you kind of thinking like, hey, we could do this at other places? Was that kind of the next thought process?
Well, they that was part of the growth process, right? Like, soon thereafter, signed a franchise agreement to become franchisee number 33 for Anytime Fitness. That now, golly, who knows how many thousands they have, right? But we were number
Right.
33. Opened up a location about 2 hours away from that original location, brought on another business partner who's going to be a partner slash the manager at that facility that lived in that town. So that was going to be kind of number two. And frankly, we thought that'd probably end up being kind of like a prototype, right? Like, where there's a club component, but very heavy on training. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was
Right.
almost like training with a membership option. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so so that was next. That opened up and it went well and was successful and profitable. And then there was a lot of kind of exploration to look in other venues, and pretty close to signing a handful of leases in other areas. Now, mind you, at this point, that was about the time that um the first economic downturn I ever experienced as a business owner came around, and it didn't really have a whole lot of negative impact on us from a business standpoint at all, but it did um, change the idea of expansion. There just wasn't, maybe not as much opportunity that way. But yeah, I mean, open that second spot uh, just about a year after the first one opened, and the that health club and the training side of it, and kind of had that same mentality. It was a real race to grow it and build some stuff, and it was exciting because instead of being kind of a subleaser in somebody else's space, being able to control the whole environment, being able to do even more creative stuff. And so, yeah, that was a lot of fun too.
See, you mentioned something there. I don't remember if this was the first or second location, but you had the manager as one of the owners. Was that a
Mhm.
was that a very conscious decision to kind of have someone with boots on the ground there every day that also has like an ownership stake, or did you just kind of happen to work out that way?
Maybe a little bit of both, right? Like, so this is a person that I already knew, actually from my hometown. I mean, used to come to my baseball camps when I was coaching. His dad had been pretty active, booster for us. He was going to be moving to that town. He had a relationship with me, had a relationship with the other business partner, and so this was a market that, like the one that we had just opened up in, was probably underserved. And so there was kind of this joint decision that we would do this. And because he was going to be living in that town, he would be the manager and be paid a salary as the manager, as well as being an owner. And so,
Mhm.
it wasn't like a strategy, okay, we're going to have a co owner in every successive location. It just happened that,
Mhm.
um, from a geographic standpoint, it made sense.
Got it. All right, so you've got a couple locations now, and obviously this story doesn't end with you having 50 different franchises all over the state of Kentucky, right? What was the next turning point?
Well, so I attended a seminar. Actually, our whole team went to this seminar in Connecticut. That a gentleman named Ryan Lee, that I think most people that might be listening to this are at least somewhat familiar with. Ryan was hosting a seminar, and we go, and I'm feeling pretty good about the progress that we've made. And then we're in the crowd, and the people on stage are, presenting, telling their story. They're the leading expert, so to speak. And the guy who starts to talk about selling is who later became a business partner and a good friend of mine. He's talking about selling, and he's like, "Well, I sold 4 clients or 5 clients or something like that, last month." And I'm like, "Man, I sold 3 yesterday, like the day before we left." And like, maybe I'm kind of on the wrong side of this. Maybe the stuff that we do doesn't have to be limited by geography. And it was just kind of an aha moment. So I didn't really know how to go share what we were doing, but it was clear to me at that point, after listening to all those people, that what we were doing wasn't um, just locally pretty successful. I mean, in those circles, that would have been considered pretty successful by any measure. So, started to seek out some expertise and some connections on just essentially packaging up what we were doing and saying, "Hey, here's what's
Mhm.
worked. Go do this." Came along a gentleman that I know you've interviewed for some other stuff, Eric Ruth. and
Mhm.
talked with Eric, and he said, "Man, I'd love to publish you. I have an audience of trainers." And he interviewed me. We put together an info product that was titled the Personal Training Money Machine. It basically was just everything that we did, our marketing material, our ops manuals, all of it. Like, and he just interviewed me for all of it, and we brought it to market. We sold a pretty good number of them, and that was kind of off to the races in sharing um, expertise with other business owners. Now, that didn't preclude us from growing the local stuff. In all honesty, I was thinking in terms of, hey, the money we make with the internet stuff, we need to, go ahead and use to fund and accelerate this expansion. But
Mhm.
some of the expansion opportunities slowed, so a little more of the emphasis on growing the internet side of things just kind of picked up. And so there was, an ebook soon thereafter, and coaching program, and really started to pick up steam there. Probably, I would say 3 years into owning the facilities.
And so were you just seeing enough traction then in the info world that it's like, this is becoming a better use of my time than trying to continue to expand the kind of brick and mortar side of things?
Well, so there were a couple pieces of it, right? Like there were a few options to expand, but because of the geography of where we were, they were all kind of spread out. It was like it's an hour this way or an hour that way. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to do something and then 3 miles down the road or 4 miles down the road, I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
And I knew how much time I was already spending going back and forth to the health club just a couple days a week. I'm like, well, okay, if we get to 12, what's my life look like then? I've got a young family. I want to spend time with them. Um, how does that actually look? And so that started to get it me, and obviously, at that point I had a business partner, that from my perspective started to get me thinking in terms of how do maybe I look at expansion online versus expansion like locally, in Kentucky and maybe bordering states. And
Mhm.
fortunately, at that point, with the online stuff, um, there were a kind of a surge of opportunities. Just people that had, maybe some interesting intellectual property, but didn't really know how to scale it, wanted a little bit more on the business support side of it. And so there were some things that it was almost like, hey, instead of opening a gym, I'm going to take an ownership stake in this small business and try to grow it that way. And so there just seemed to be more and more of those opportunities coming along. And so I think not being myopic and saying, hey, there's only one way to grow, there were just some some things that kind of steered that direction. And the business coaching side of things started to take off. We had created one coaching program that did fine, but then it was kind of like the precursor to a bigger one called Boot Camp Blueprint that was really the first coaching program serving fitness boot camp owners in the industry. And that really took off and became a springboard to say, man, I don't necessarily know that we need to open up any of the locations. This can be the foundation of something probably even bigger.
And at the time, was the business partner in the brick and mortars also someone that was getting on board with the online stuff? or was there like a friction there where one person wanted to do one thing, you were maybe going a different way?
Well, the gentleman at the health club in Owensboro, about that time, uh, he he wanted to do something different. He and the other business partner didn't exactly get along, and he, I think, wanted to be a little bit more independent anyway. He's gone on to become a very successful real estate agent, has his own real estate practice, and I think that he knew that that was going to be kind of more his angle. And and to this day, I have a great relationship with him. Um, and then the business partner that I had in the original facility, he was kind of in between on the online stuff. He wasn't probably
Hmm.
as interested in it as I was, and certainly didn't get as involved early on. I just think my personality kind of lent itself to doing that sort of stuff where I was just, diving in head first on it. I think he was curious about it and saw that there might be an opportunity. And then I think he wanted to be part of it in part because if it was going to take any of my time, there was an opportunity cost. My time wasn't going to be involved quite as heavily in the facility. So, I mean, he came along, and I think over time he got um, more involved. Though, admittedly, it probably I was just very much kind of assuming the same role that I had always assumed. Like, hey, I'm going to be the coach, the content creator, the salesperson, all that stuff that I had done from the time dating back to coaching baseball. And,
Hmm.
I think he kind of, I don't know, maybe kind of sifted around trying to find the right seat for him there. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think over time he definitely got more excited about the potential to reach people that weren't local to us.
Right. Like the scale with education marketing and information marketing is just enormous, and there's no boundaries. And you don't have the same amount of overhead that you do with just regular brick and mortars. Although, I mean, you guys did build it into a very serious business, which had its own amount of overhead with employees and all of that kind of stuff that we'll get into. But so, how long did you hang on to the facilities then before it
Man,
was time
we
to?
we hung on to the first one. Um, when the lease expired, they didn't really want to renew the lease because we were probably more profitable than they were at the health club. So there there was some, you know I don't know, maybe 4 years there, maybe five, might have been five there, but then the Anytime Fitness, the other facility, 9 years. Um,
Okay.
and even had that after the two franchises were in full swing and everything else. And it obviously became less of a priority as time went on. But I mean, it never stopped being profitable. So it hung on until it just was like, it's just not, it doesn't make sense with the future vision.
As a gym owner, Coach Catalyst is the key to having low turnover. For several years, I struggled and spent 10 to 20 hours a week communicating with clients via phone calls, Facebook Messenger, email, and text messages. I had tried everything to make my life more efficient. I was at my wit's end. And then I found Coach Catalyst. Since starting the software, I have found a life again, and my clients are thanking me for being so involved in their fitness life. I've cut my daily commitment to interacting with over 300 clients to under 15 minutes a day and have streamlined my 6-week challenges. I couldn't recommend it more. I just don't know if I would even be here today if it wasn't for Coach Catalyst. If you don't have an account already, you're missing out and not helping the people you could be.
Hmm. And so, I mean, you guys went all in on the kind of information marketing, that world, education marketing. And it started with products and then eventually evolved into coaching and then eventually evolved into full on franchises. Um,
Yeah.
it'd probably be a whole episode for us to just kind of unpack that 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 aspect, as there was a lot going on. But what I mean, through that major growth phase, what were some of the hardest things to looking back on it? What were some of the biggest challenges that you had in that big growth phase where you were multiple different businesses, multiple different employees in different spots?
Um, I can think of uh, a few. One would be just um spreading. I know in my case, spreading myself too thin. I mean, at one point I think I was, the CEO of like 8 different things and the CMO of a couple others. And which at that stage, it probably means you're not very good at any of your jobs, right? Because you're kind of just trying to batch things and just check them off the list because there's so many things on the plate. Now, the when I say it that way, it's not like, well, hey, I'm CEO of this and it's an hour a week. I mean, there was definitely a hierarchy of businesses and
Mhm.
what their focus was and what kind of impact they had on the total bottom line. But still, I think it would be pretty arrogant to think that 30% of my attention is impactful as 100% of somebody who's committed to a competitor's business. So that was probably the first thing that that really sticks out to me. The second was over time, I started to have some friction with a business partner, and I think a lot of it was, you start out with a little training business and retail business and a health club, and so you're kind of trying to figure all this stuff out as you go, and
Mhm.
and I think over time, I kind of always the coach in me always played the same role, right? Like I had been the same role. I'd been a head coach since I was 23 years old, so I was kind of always used to wearing those hats. And I think that
Mhm.
it probably took him a little bit longer to sort through that. He was a little bit younger than me, and he had to kind of find the right rhythm there. And then you couple that with the fact that every new thing that we're doing is kind of uncharted territory for both of us. I
Right.
think, that probably created some friction. It created also on our parts, on both of our parts, kind of not knowing exactly, what, okay, how much staffing do we need or where should we allocate our resources? Because again, it was all very much uncharted territory. So, if I think about it, like those are the things that in hindsight were problems that really reared their heads pretty quickly.
I mean, knowing what you know now and being able to kind of look at it retrospectively, do you feel like there's things that you could have done differently? And we can start with being the CEO of multiple kind of entities and really being responsible. There are things you see now where you could have done them differently and it maybe the result would have been different?
That's like 20 episodes in itself. I Yeah, I mean there are a number of things. I mean the obvious one is doing fewer things better, which has kind of become a mantra of mine along the way, and that was a hard-earned
Mhm.
lesson, right? Um, the uh, some of it though, I think I mean, you have seen this with the businesses you've built. There, I mean, there wasn't like a coaching program out there where it was like, hey, how do you take one studio to a coaching program? to a franchise. Like there wasn't somebody to go give you a blueprint for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of it, in theory, it'd be nice to say, well, hey, roles and responsibilities would have been clearer, or um, maybe if there was an imbalance in contribution, then the equity should have been distributed differently or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But it's like, man, you don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
um, so, yeah, there are probably some things that definitely could have been different. But the only one that I think that I could recognize in the moment without and actually absolutely have an answer would have been don't do as many things. Fewer things better, stay the course, get depth over width. The rest of it, that it'd you'd recognize it, but it would already be a problem by the time you would recognize it.
Right. And do you think continuing to add things was just a part of, hey, that looks really interesting. I think we can help with that. And then you get to a point where it's like, oh, we're pretty deep right now and we can't really go back on some of this stuff.
Precisely. Right? Like it's you see the opportunity, you don't look at the opportunity cost, um you you kind of uh move on it a little bit and maybe underestimate how much time it's going to take, and uh you know what what the actual workload or contribution is going to be in order to get it to a, a level that it merits that much of your time and attention.
Hmm.
So it yeah it, and I say this uh now, like I mean, I'm ecstatic that all of it happened,
Hmm.
because I don't know if there's anybody else in our industry that has the unique combination of experiences that I've
Hmm.
been able to have, from working at a university and coaching athletes and some things in the professional sports sector on a really small level, and then moving in and having facilities and owning all these businesses, and then all the stuff that's happened after. And it's like, well, for the things that I want to do today, all of those things being in my kind of mental library come in really handy. But yeah, at the time, like if I were trying to grow a single business, just grow that one business and say, how do I make this one great?
So do you have like you now you're really known for the kind of the ideal business. That's kind of a term you've coined. And so based upon this stuff, have you kind of created a criteria? Because you're probably inundated with new opportunities like
Mhm.
weekly or daily. And so do you have kind of a set of criteria that you use that you kind of have to check all these boxes in order for this to merit the attention?
I mean, yes, that there's a handful of things. I don't have like a checklist on my desk, but it's largely,
Right.
am I going to be able to do something that I'm really excited about doing? Am I going to be able to work with people that it's fulfilling to work with? Is it going to be potentially profitable enough to merit moving time away from something else because I'm not adding to my work schedule? Um,
Mhm.
and you know, it, so things like that. And there are a couple other things that I probably think through. Um, and so I still will dabble in things outside of my core business, but I think the biggest difference is I can be the strategist in those or the advisor in those, but I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
be the operator in those. And that was a
Right.
big change from previously. And I mean, I've written a daily email for like 17 years, but I was also writing emails for a bunch of other businesses and everything else. And so
Mm-hmm.
if somebody else can't be the kind of day-to-day operator of it, then I would immediately disqualify it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Your daily email. So you've been doing that for a really long time. How do you continue to come up with stuff to talk about? Right? Because I mean, you're not talking about everything under the sun. You kind of have a core set of beliefs that you're really staying within. And so, is it just continuing to put
Mhm.
different spins on things?
Um, so I think about this differently than everybody else does, right? Like everybody thinks of this as like an idea faucet or something. Like I just keep churning out
Mm-hmm.
ideas or spitting them out or whatever. Um, I think of it almost as like recycling conversations. Like if I have I mean, we're here talking right now. I had Mike Robertson in for a private client session today, like a consulting session. There are things that he and I discussed that if I strip away the personal piece of it and take the general idea, would be valuable to anybody, or at least most people
Mm-hmm.
that are in my audience. And so I'm just taking something that is valuable in this setting and saying, okay, how can I disseminate this over here to more people? Because I think that most of us, would benefit from the answers to questions that other people ask. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that's how I approach it. Like I take a conversation and then repurpose it in a way that doesn't compromise the integrity of the original conversation, or the
Mm-hmm.
uniqueness to that person's situation, but the principles, the themes, I think are often kind of universal, and so that's so as long as I'm coaching, I'm not going to have a shortage of ideas. Frankly, I could probably have twice as many emails go out based on the volume of conversations I have, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know as a fact, but I can't imagine over the last 15, 16, 17 years, anybody else on earth having more conversations with coaches, trainers, business owners in our industry than me, right? Like, because I've
Right.
always, a lot of the people who kind of do what I do start to detach themselves from actually coaching the client. They become
Mm-hmm.
the owner, the CEO, whereas I get a lot of my fulfillment from actually coaching. But I also know that if I
Mm-hmm.
detached myself from the actual coaching some, then I would probably lose my source for a lot of the ideas.
Mm-hmm. Do How many emails do you think you've missed in 17 years? Like a daily email? Are you batting 1,000 or?
Zero, zero. 100%, like, yeah, there are 0 misses in 17 years.
So, and it was that just a decision that you said, this is going to be my contribution, my strategy, and I'm just not going to miss?
Alright, so the way this actually happened was, so I mentioned earlier in our talk, Roy Williams, The Wizard of Ads, the book that clearly changed the trajectory of my professional life.
Mhm.
Well, really, it started out as this compilation of weekly memos he sent his clients, and I said, you know what, I'm going to send a memo to our staff. We got 2 locations. I can't be at both of them at once. I'm going to send a memo to them. I'm going to just send them an idea a day, and then once we started doing this, the the info marketing stuff. I thought, well, I'll start to send
Mhm.
some of these to other people. And then somewhere during that first year, it became very visible to me that the revenue that we generate is directly correlated to the frequency by which I send emails. And, uh, more emails, more money. So, man, I'm just going to start sending an email a day. And then, once I got like 3 years into it, uh, it became one of those things that you're almost kind of like stuck with, right? Like you can't miss now.
Right.
And I think of it, and I know this dates me a little bit, but I think of it like Cal Ripken and the games played streak. Like, he
Yep.
played, 2,682 games or something like that in a row. And it's like taking one day off would have never like hurt him, but you can't take one day off if you're in the middle of that. And that's kind of how I've
Right.
felt because it's a talking point on these, on podcasts.
Yeah.
It's a talking point when I go speak places. So I'm like, well, now I'm kind of stuck with it. Fortunately for me, I've got a backlog of things that I've written that if for some reason I couldn't write tomorrow for something, uh, there are plenty of things that
Mhm.
haven't been sent or whatever else. But yeah, it's been daily. There hadn't even really been days that were close. Um, and but it's also become much easier to write. Like I could
Right.
go churn out an email now in 6 or 7 minutes that would have taken me 45 minutes 10 years ago.
Mhm. So do you have a strategy as far as like outlining topics or ideas, or is it more just kind of like a free flowing what I'm thinking about right now?
Um, Definitely more the latter, but I have a way to document ideas. Like when I get an idea, it's either going in a physical notebook or in the notes app on my phone, and then eventually getting transferred to a Google Doc where there's like
Mhm.
a list of ideas and occasionally like bullet points underneath them because maybe I had a conversation with Mike Robertson today, but I'm not going to be ready to write about it till later. Well, there are going to be some bullet points that remind me of what we talked about. So that's about it. Like I don't have, a 3 act story that I'm writing from or hero's journey that I'm writing from, like that type of framework. But yeah, I mean I have like an idea log, if you will.
So do you on a typical morning or whenever you write your emails, is it opening up that idea log and kind of selecting an idea? If there isn't one that's just like, hey, I want to talk about it today? Or is it blank sheet of paper, just start writing and then it comes?
It definitely the former. I'm not a great blank sheet of paper guy. I take a lot of notes. I do a lot of jotting things on Google. Like I've become very much a Google Docs person in that it's always there, always accessible to me, so I can move things there as quickly as I can. I used to be a notebook guy constantly, but after having stacks of notebooks there and not knowing how to easily search through them,
Mhm.
it's easier to organize my thoughts there. And then I'm even dabbling with the like a remarkable notebook that I can
Yep.
do with digital stuff and move it along. So I wouldn't say that's become as fluid as the way that I've done it yet, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Right. So you're proficient in the idea standpoint so that you have this pool of notes, ideas, takeaways, and then really the email is a way to expand on that particular idea and just bring it to just give it a little bit more body, a little bit more breath.
hmm and I'm also I probably very much kind of like when we talked about the, hey, did I feel any sort of fear or pressure starting a business? I have a different maybe way of viewing the emails. It's like, man, when you've written a daily email for 17 years, you're like, you know, 6,000 in. So some of them, like, they're disposable, right? Like, I get a new one tomorrow. So if it doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
perfect, it doesn't have to be the top ranked email out of 6,000. So it doesn't, there's not a lot of pressure there. And,
Yeah.
the ones that I think are good or get positive feedback can be recycled in some other fashion, posted on social, used in some other way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the disposable ones, well, guess what? I live to play another day.
Right. Yeah. That definitely takes the pressure off. You're not trying to write the best email of your life every day. And I think that's why a lot of people get maybe a little bit scared of communicating a lot because they're trying to create this masterpiece each time they sit down, and like an email is hopefully opened but may only be open for a short period of time and then hits the trash can, and hopefully you get the next one. And that's probably another benefit to writing every day, because most people don't open all of their emails every day. And so with that consistency, even if you're only getting a 30% open rate, like they're seeing more of your stuff than other people's stuff because of the sheer volume.
Yeah, I think that's always been my mentality is, I think that when I was a college baseball coach, I knew that, hey, I'm single and I don't have things that are priorities above this. So I'm going to call them more. I'm going to follow up with them more. I'm going to be more involved, be more present. I'm going to coach them until they sign a letter of intent and take me on as their actual coach. And I've kind of kept that mentality in that, you know what? I there are a lot of things that I may not be able to be the the best at when it comes to marketing, but I know that, man, if somebody's going to beat me with email newsletters, I got a 17-year head start. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, my intent is very clear. It's like I'm trying to have a conversation with a friend. I'm trying to help them move forward towards having the business. And as a result of that, hopefully the life they want. And um, so so for me, they're just like these small little relationship deposits that I make day after day. And so that's the mentality. Whereas I think a lot of other people, um, they'll view email marketing through a different lens. They'll do what you said and put a lot of pressure on a specific email, or they will only send emails that are pitching something, or they'll put the emphasis on the the result of a specific email rather than the culminative you know work of all of them in building a relationship. And so I don't know that my strategy is like right for everybody, but I know that I've got a specific plan that I'm adhering to, whereas I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of other people just kind of dabble in mixing and matching plans or trying something, and if it doesn't work immediately, moving on. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of things in business and in life, right? Like you don't have to. What the old adage is, and a kind of an okay plan executed extraordinarily well will beat the best plan poorly executed. So I've got a
Mm-hmm.
plan and I execute it with relentless consistency.
Right. And it's working out for you, so that's why you keep doing it, right? Um, all right, so let's kind of change gears here. You work with a lot of coaches, people that are in the fitness industry, gyms, boutique studios, people that are kind of on the ground working with clients. And so, if if a coach is listening to this and they're really trying to set themselves up to be successful in the next 5 years, what are some things you're seeing right now that your really successful gyms are doing? And what are you guys thinking about to be a really good business over the next, the next 5 years, 10 years, the next decade?
I think the first one that comes to mind, and a lot of these things that we've already kind of scratched the surface on. You talked about, hey, what's not going to change? What hasn't changed? I think
Mm-hmm.
that being comfortable and confident in the fact that if you focus on the client over everything else, that you already have a pretty meaningful head start, right? Because if you're client centric, if you're focused on what's important to them, how they feel, making them feel important, um, that kind of is the North Star in all of this, right? And if you do that, that's always going to be useful. That's always going to have great importance. Whereas if you start at the other end and fall in love with a particular tool or a particular methodology, that stuff tends to cycle pretty regularly.
Mm-hmm.
So but the person that you're serving, like, there's always going to be a human on the other end of all of this. So if your focus is there and you're using the tools, the technology, the resources, the circumstances at hand to better serve them, and that's the way that you're making decisions, you're going to be way better off. And so I think that that's a forever thing. The second thing that I would say, if you want to be successful, um, you got to figure out what success is to you. Borrowing somebody else's definition of success, trying to ascertain what somebody else is doing by looking at their social media or something like that. I mean, all of those are pretty flawed, right? Um, so you got to figure out what success is to you, and then you can start to build your plan to get there. Um, and because a lot of times, I mean, we've seen it time and time again, right? Like, somebody will say, "Well, I want to be bigger. I want to have a gym that's this big and has this much gross revenue." Like, okay, well, why? And
Mm-hmm.
figuring that out, knowing what success means to you, probably matters as much as anything. You have to be willing to, figure out how to operate a business if you're going to be a business owner. And I know you said coach, so not necessarily everybody isn't always a business owner, but since I'm a business coach,
Right.
I'll assume people who are this deep in the podcast probably have that interest. Um,
Right.
you, you know, you, you need to figure out how to connect with new prospects and how to move them to become paying clients and then deliver a result through an experience they enjoy. You have to come up with some iteration of that fits you and what you want your business to be, because the tactics of how you connect with them, man, I listed it out at one point, and I had tried like 107 different things to generate leads. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Many of them were pretty awful and ineffective, but you got to find the ones that work for you. So if that's networking, if that's public speaking, if that's Facebook ads, like, you've got to figure out ways to do it, because ultimately, as the business owner, the buck kind of stops with you, and you're going to have to make sure that there are enough leads to support the business that you want to have. And then, sadly, for a lot of us, right, like, people buy on their terms, not on our terms. The sales cycle is based on that person, not on what we wish they would do. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so you're gonna have to follow up. You're gonna have to come up with a sales process that, whether you want to call it nurturing or a pipeline or whatever you prefer, but you got to take this person that you've connected with and then move them to this point of actually becoming a client and trusting you as a partner in helping them achieve their goals. And then you got to deliver on that. So, um, the how is something that can be pretty pliable, right? Like, I mean, some people drive all their business in through ads on social media. Other people drive the bulk of their business in through referrals. And, you got to find probably 1 to 3 tactics that fit you and your business that you could say, hey, I'm going to become very proficient at this. And if you do that, and if you're good at delivering a result, and you're being client centric, um, I think that those are the things that I would focus on. Um, I would also think a lot about, um, you know, what great clients that are in your business actually look like, rather than um, what we wish they look like. Deal with the reality of people. I think a lot of people don't do that, right? Like your best clients a lot of times aren't the people with washboard abs, and they aren't the people that um are never missing a session throughout the course of the year. They're normal
Hmm.
people that have found a place that makes their life a lot better, and they've become a valuable piece of that community. Well, you need to go find more of them. So
Hmm.
sometimes it takes appreciating what these folks actually are, right, and what business we're actually in. So, um, I mean, if you couple that with the stuff we talked about earlier, when it comes to just what's not going to change, if I'm running a business, those are the things that I'm paying attention to.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to taking care of people and then finding ways to get in front of more people. Do you think when someone, let's say a new coach, they're starting a business, there's all these tactics out there that they could use. Do you have any ways on helping someone figure out like what tactics or what maybe ones they should start with? Or is it just kind of like a spray and pray, try a bunch of different things and see where you get some traction and then put more energy to those things?
Um, I think that um, as with a lot of things we talk about, there's probably somewhere in the middle, right? I think
Hmm.
if you have a particular interest or talent in something that you can leverage to gain traction more quickly, like if you're extroverted and like networking, then by all means pursue that. If you are analytical
Hmm.
and like the idea of you know testing different ads and that sort of thing, then do that. But if not, I would tell you you need to look at what kind of things have been proven to work in attracting the type of person that you want to attract, and then from that menu, if you will, say, well, what am I willing to work for the next 6 months to be one of the best in my market at doing? Because for most anything, we're bad at it before we're good at it. And if you're not willing to put in the time to become good at it, then what you're going to find is you're just going to be trading tactic after tactic and never really gaining any ground with any of them.
Do you think that 6 month mark is a good like a good time frame to really test something? Or do you have other ways to look at, is this something that's worth me continuing to put my effort into?
Well, I think you could probably discard some things earlier than that, but I use the 6 month mark as probably a commitment slash resilience metric as much as anything. If you're like going into it,
Hmm.
hey, am I willing to go spend the next 180 days getting good at creating YouTube videos that will rank in my market, or figuring out Facebook ads. Because if you're not, then we don't need to do day one, let alone worry about day 180.
Right.
But yeah, I think there are probably, depending on the tactic, you may find that some of them aren't as effective in a particular market, or to be effective, maybe you're going to hit your budget limit before you get the traction you want. So I think that how long it takes to learn things is probably going to vary by the tactic you choose. But from a personal commitment standpoint, I think 6 months is a pretty good measure, because 3 months is probably not long enough for some of these things, and a year, I think is maybe too big an ask.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like it. Oh, this is awesome. So, I mean, we could sit here and chat all day, but we want to keep this thing moving. So I've got a few kind of rapid fire stuff here at the end that I just want kind of some fun stuff to lighten it up. All right. So the first one is taco, burrito, or quesadilla. Which one do you choose?
Taco. I love tacos. Like, if you said almost anything, I would have picked taco.
I like it. Well, then that might lead into the next one. If you could eat at one restaurant for the rest of your life, what restaurant do you choose?
Oh gosh. I'll cheat and say like Cheesecake Factory, since they've got a menu that's like encyclopedia.
Right. You'll never run out of things to eat. All right. Next one we got something you've purchased recently for $100 or less that you found has had a profound impact on your life.
My little Anchor adapter, where we travel a lot for vacations and baseball events and whatever else, and so makes life a lot easier to keep everything not only charged for me but for kids, and it charges things about 3 times as fast as the Apple stuff. So all the other ones were a little bit over $100, but that one, that's the big win for under 100.
So is it is it a battery, or is it you plug it into the wall and it's just a faster charger?
Plug it in the wall, faster charger, more ports.
Okay.
So that's my big win there.
I like it. All right, last one. If you could have dinner with anyone on the planet, past or present, who do you go to dinner with?
Just one person?
If you need to add a couple people, you can. But
if I were going to pick 3, I got an eclectic mix for you: Abraham Lincoln, Branch Rickey, and Walt Disney.
Who is the second one? I'm unfamiliar with the second one.
Branch Rickey was ESPN listed him as the most influential figure in sports in the 20th century. He was the person who brought Jackie Robinson into baseball to integrate baseball. And as a side note, we're from the same hometown.
Well, there you go. That's awesome. Well, they can put your name right up on the water tower with his then. I like it.
And I don't know that we're going to be there, but I wouldn't mind having dinner with him.
That's awesome. Well, Pat Rigsby, man, I appreciate hanging out and sharing your wisdom with us, and excited to continue to learn more from you. Where, if people want to learn more about you, should they go?
The simplest place is patrigsby.com. It's got links to podcasts, how to join the newsletter, all the varied social media things that I do. So patrigsby.com is probably the simplest place to start connecting.
Make it easy. All right, Pat. Appreciate the time, brother.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Coach Catalyst podcast. If you are a coach looking to do more for your clients than just workouts, give Coach Catalyst a test drive. Try it for 14 days. Jump on call with your personal strategy coach, Ashley, and see how easy technology can be, all for free. Tell them Trevor sent you. Until next time, keep changing lives.